Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for session 3 of our Array October event. We're devoting the entire month of October to all things array. We'll be focusing on multi-hydrophone deployments, also known as arrays. Throughout this month, we're going to be sharing content about arrays, how to build them, when and why to use them, as well as inviting different experts to join us for our live sessions exploring acoustic arrays from around the world. We started Array October with an introduction to arrays from Mark Wood and Pierre Almeida, and then we continued with the theme of multi-hydrophone arrays last week when guest experts from the Ocean Observatory Initiative joined us to discuss their cabled regional array. Both sessions were recorded, and you can find them on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. Today, we move to the most northern array we'll explore this month, and I apologize for my pronunciation, LoVe, Ocean Observatory located in Norway. And I'm joined now by senior researcher at the Institute of Marine Research in Norway, Geir Pederson. Hi, Geir. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having us. And great pronunciation, by the way.
I will do my best throughout the course of this live session. So for those tuning in who may be unfamiliar with Ocean Sonics, we're an ocean acoustics company based in Truro, Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. And we created the IC Listen. This is a real-time smart hydrophone, and it's a tool that's used to collect ocean sound data. And what makes it special is that this hydrophone processes data at the source in real time, so you can actively listen and view data while the sensor is deployed. Our goal through the creation of the IC Listen was to make ocean sound data more accessible. And accessibility happens through a number of ways, and this includes the ease of use. Hydrophone arrays are notoriously difficult to design, assemble, and deploy. They also produce huge amounts of data. They require smart power budgeting and configuration. By using an IC Listen for an acoustic array, many of these headaches are relieved. These hydrophones self-synchronize and are relatively low power, and they also come with deployment tools such as control hubs, specialized software to make array assembly, deployment, and data collection easier. So in keeping with the theme of Array October, we're virtually traveling to the coast of northern Norway to the LoVe Ocean Observatory. The LoVe Cabled Ocean Observatory is a Norwegian infrastructure for marine research, monitoring, and subsea technology development. This area is an oceanographic, biologic, and economic hotspot off the northern Norway coast. The first phase of the LoVe Observatory was funded by Statoil in 2013. The expansion of this observatory was granted funding by the Research Council of Norway in 2015 through the Infrastructure Program. The infrastructure project, led by the Institute of Marine Research, is a collaboration between major Norwegian marine research institutions and industry. So during today's presentation, Geir will provide us with an overview of the observatory, including the acoustic framework. After he finishes his presentation, we will have a question and answer session. So if you want to know some more detail about what we covered today, you can leave us a comment on our live stream and we will do our best to answer it live after the presentation. So now Geir is going to take it away. He's going to share his screen and teach us all about the most northern ocean observatory that we're going to address.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we can get this working. So how does that look?
Looks fantastic.
Ah, great. Yeah, so my name is Geir Pederson. I'm a scientist at the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research. I also listed two other names here, which are really important for this project. Espen Johnsen, which is the project manager, and Gusong Chang, who is the lead engineer and the work package manager for operations. So I'll go through the background for why we have this observatory and why we placed it where we have. So some of the scientific rationale behind this. I'll also describe the observatory, some of the technology that's built into it, and end up with some examples of the data we collected so far, with a special emphasis on the passive acoustics, and of course the IC Listen hydrophone on our first node has been a really important part of this. And of course, the technology they've developed makes it very easy for us to integrate that into a cabled ocean observatory. I'll just start out a couple of slides about the institute. So we're located in Norway. We're roughly 1,000 people, and our main activities are monitoring, research, and advisory work on all things marine. And we also work from ecosystem monitoring impacts all the way to the provision of safe and healthy seafood. Our main office is in Bergen, but we have offices around the country. And traditionally, and still, our kind of main research platforms are our research vessels. But we are moving more and more into applying new types of technology and new platforms, such as ocean observatories and autonomous vehicles, both subsurface and on the surface. Which is the topic for the rest of the talk. Just a fun fact is that today, 15th October, our institute is 120 years. So while everyone else is out partying, I'm here presenting our infrastructure for you. Actually, the party was earlier today. So, okay, the observatory. So we have to take a mental journey, at least Rose needs to do it, from Nova Scotia to northern Norway. And the red little box there indicates where the observatory is. And one of the things about Norway is that it is mostly ocean. So about the ocean is 5 times the surface area of the coast or the land. And the coastline is something like 100,000 kilometers if you count every island and every fjord and every peninsula, which makes it the second longest coastline after Canada. And of course, this is very challenging to monitor and to it's very challenging for a population of 5.4 people to manage and to monitor these kind of large areas. So definitely using new technologies in this task is really important. And Norwegians have lived off the ocean, and the ocean is the single most important thing for most Norwegians. Our major industries, back to the Viking Age and even further back, relies on the ocean. So fisheries in particular, from the 60s, oil and gas, from 80s, 90s, aquaculture. And we also see more and more new types of industries moving into the ocean, like sustainable energy, offshore wind, carbon sequestration, and so on. So it's really important and challenging to get enough data for sustainable management. And LoVe Ocean Infrastructure is one of those kind of new technologies we're implementing in order to get more information about the ocean and improve our management. So, like Rose mentioned, this is a national infrastructure for research, so it's funded by the Norwegian government. The Institute of Marine Research is project manager, and these are the other partners of that project. I'll get back to this, but like Rose also mentioned, this is kind of a two-step rocket or two-phase rocket. The first one, which is Node 1, and the land infrastructure was established some years ago, while we're now in this kind of second phase, which is funded by the Research Council. This is just a small movie that will kind of run in the background. I will just show a couple of images from throughout the project. And the point here is that it has been a very challenging project for us, and it still is a very, very challenging project. This is something completely different from what we used to. This is more similar to, let's say, development of a small offshore oil and gas field or something like that. But we set out to build an infrastructure mainly based on off-the-shelf type subsea technologies. And we managed to do that with kind of the backbone structured, so the high voltage cable, subsea distribution units. When it comes to the scientific platforms and sensor, they have been more or less kind of developed throughout the project when it comes to both phases. So, and I will come into a bit more detail on the platforms and some of the things that perhaps make them a bit different from some of the other stuff that's out there. So it is, like I mentioned, it's been challenging and it's still challenging. So there is a lot of, it's been a steep learning curve, and definitely if someone is thinking about making a new observatory, then please get in touch, because we have learned a lot through this process about what to do and what not to do. I think that's the last one, so I'll go further. So LoVe Ocean, it's an ocean observatory of the Lofoten Vesterålen area, and it has sensors connected with a hybrid fiber optic high voltage C4 cable national infrastructure. And the plan, when it's fully operational, is to provide data for real-time monitoring of the biological and physical chemical environment in this area. And another important part is to provide real-time or near real-time data to ocean prediction models, which is important both for maritime transport, fisheries, aquaculture, but also for predicting pollution or the spread of pollution. We also will monitor fish stocks. I'll get back to that in a bit, climate parameters, and monitor and quantify human impact. It's also a very important part of this project to provide data for basic research, and also for schools and higher education, and in general to get people excited about the ocean and raise general awareness of it and issues connected with the ocean. The final part is we also want to use this as a test infrastructure for new ocean technologies. And I can mention one project that's already up and running, and that's European project developing garage and an autonomous robotic seafloor infrastructure for bentopelagic monitoring. This crawler is familiar to many of you, I think. You can also find this in Canada. So this will be deployed and demonstrated, this full system, in next summer or autumn. So these dots indicate the nodes of the observatory. And one of the reasons it is located where it is, you can probably deduce from this image, and that's the shelf is almost at its most shallow in this area, which means that with a relatively short observatory, we're able to monitor the coastal currents. So that's the red lines, and the Atlantic water, that's green lines, moving into the Barents Sea from the south. And one of the things that's important about that, in addition to the oceanography, is that south of the observatory is where you find the major spawning grounds of northeast Arctic cod. So the cod migrates past the observatory, spawns, and then the egg and larvae will drift past the observatory into the nursing grounds in the Barents Sea. Similarly, for Norwegian spring spawning herring, spawning south of the observatory, and the larvae will drift into the Barents Sea. And we're able to, in theory, to monitor both the adult fish migrating south as well as the larvae drifting northward. In addition, this is a really high, or an area with high density of marine mammals. One particular example is the Blake Yup, which is slightly to the north of the observatory. And that area might be familiar to some of you as a summer feeding ground for spermoids. And this is a zoom in of the canyon itself. And there are also some where the observatory is. And there are also some interesting features in itself in this canyon. You have pretty high current going through it, which means that you get these kind of huge sand waves. There are also areas of gas seeps. And finally, and most importantly, when it comes to this observatory, is that you have a fairly large region of cold water corals in this area. And I'll get back to that when it comes to the data examples. So that was some of the kind of ecological and biological reasons for this observatory. It's also an area where there is a lot of human activities. So in this map, you see a lot of kind of different potential stressors. I usually don't put up these maps because it looks much worse than it actually is. But one thing you can see is that there's a lot of traffic along the coast, marine traffic. You have these heat maps shows fisheries activity, and you have those two very nice parallel clean lines outside the shelf break, and that's kind of the major shipping lines from north to south. So you have oil tankers from Russia, for instance, coming through here. There is more and more aquaculture, which are the red dots, and there's also fair amount of tourism, especially to the north, and more exotic stuff like this test firing range for rockets, which again is a bit to the north. This was also an area where people envisioned oil and gas exploration, but that will probably not happen. But the observatory is still upstream from active oil and gas fields, so it's also relevant in that case. Okay, so moving over to the observatory itself. So this is what the view is from node 1 towards where we have the land station. And this is just a kind of flyby to have a overview of the small community where the infrastructure starts. So this is a small fishing village, and yeah, would definitely encourage anyone who likes nature to visit the Vesterålen and Lofoten area. It is a really stunning place, and also, as you can see, the beaches are great. Unfortunately, the water isn't that warm. And this is the actual site where the cable goes out to the ocean. Again, a very good beach. So this is an overview of kind of the infrastructure. So the red line indicates the high voltage cable. Numbers 1 through 6 or 7 indicates the nodes, and in most cases, like 1, 2, 3, that also these nodes also have subsea distribution units. So as you can see, 5 and 6 are not cabled. They are kind of standalone and have possibility to communicate acoustically with the rest of the infrastructure. But and if you have a look at the picture to the right, you also see some dots up in the water column. So node 4 and 5 also have moorings with sensors throughout the water column. So the mean depth inside the canyon, where most of the nodes are roughly 250 meters. Node 4 is kind of halfway down the slope at 1,500 meters, while 5 is on the seafloor in the deep sea, so roughly 2,500 meters depth. So phase 1, that was the land infrastructure, the first node, and phase 2, which we're in now, are the kind of remaining nodes and cable. Basic building blocks of the infrastructure is land station, hybrid AC power fiber optic cable, 2 subsea distribution units. And these subsea distribution units transform from 3 kilovolts to 330 volts, which is then fed into the scientific nodes. The subsea distribution units also split the fibers, which again is distributed to different nodes. So all of these SDUs have a range of connectors which enable us to kind of connect in these scientific nodes. And the nodes generally consist of 2 platforms. One is the main platform that holds most of the sensors, and and a satellite. And the satellite usually consists of a hydrophone, and that's one of the points. You need to separate the hydrophone from some of the other instrumentation, such as, or in particular, the echo sounders and the current meters. So in phase 2, this was delivered by the SDUs and cable came from Nexans, the platforms from Metas, which is a small company in Bergen, Norway, which is also the distributor over here for ISOLISTEN. Phase 2, which we're in now, cable and SDUs were provided by Siemens Energy, while the nodes and moorings are being developed or have been developed by Develogic. It's located in Hamburg, Germany. So this is kind of the simplified overview of the whole infrastructure, showing kind of where we have the high voltage cable and where we distribute low power to the rest of the scientific nodes. And also it indicates the moorings on node 4 and node 5. So this is kind of the overview of what we observe at most of these nodes. Almost all of them are equipped with these sensors or with sensors to observe these parameters, including hydrophones and echo sounders. Node 7 is a bit different because it's also near the seep area, so there are a couple of additional sensors there. So just diving a bit into the technical part and looking at a couple of things that are a bit unique to this observatory, at least so far. And one of the things is the use of high voltage connectors. So this, I think our observatory was the first to use these kind of connectors. And they're basically wet metal high voltage connectors, meaning that we can, in the unlikely event something goes wrong, actually disconnect the kind of backbone. So you can disconnect between SDU2 and 3, for instance. These are now available up to 10 kilowatts, I think. Another thing is that we didn't really have budget for the 4th SDU, but Siemens was able to make this kind of mini SDU, which is electrical optical termination head and basically a step down transformer, which lowered the cost of the total system considerably, and that really helped us out. Moving over to the platforms of the scientific nodes, like I mentioned, these are developed by Develogic. So they're basically, you have this yellow frame on the left, and then you have the instrument package to the right, and inside the frame. So the frame stays on the bottom. That's connected to the SDU, while this kind of instrument package can be retrieved without having to disconnect physically from the infrastructure. And that's enabled by Develogic's wireless power data transmitter and receiver. So it's inductive. So there are no physical decoupling when you take up the sensors or the package with sensors for maintenance, for instance, and calibration. So this is kind of an example of retrieving the instrument package. So what we're doing here is from land sending the command for it to be released, and then we pick it up at the surface. DevelopChick is also working on a tool to relocate it at the seafloor without use of ROV. But for a lot of our operations, we do use ROV from, for instance, this vessel on the left. So very briefly about data management and access. So all the data is being transmitted to IMR, to our offices in Bergen, where they're stored, and then after they're stored, they are converted, or most of the data is converted to netcdf format, and then will be available through an API, OpenDAP thread server. So basically, you can download data with any kind of software that you usually use, like R, or Python, or MATLAB. The kind of the heavier data sets, like the echo sounders, the hydrophones, we're still kind of working on a solution for that. But for the time series, this will be kind of our data flow. Another option is to go into the Norwegian Marine Data Center, where the data is stored, and then we'll have these landing pages for each node describing what the data is, and then you're able to kind of download by point and click if you like that more. And we have just launched the website together with kind of a pilot of the data portal. So I encourage you to visit LoVe Ocean and have a look. But this is all the data part and all the kind of visualization and making the data available is a work in progress. But we'll probably spend the winter getting all of this in place. And yes, we'll also publish a data paper that gives more information about the data and how to access it, also probably during the winter, and also give some example code of how to retrieve the data in a simple manner. So moving over to some examples. So I'll get to the passive acoustics in a bit, but just start with cameras and also show some of the echo sounder data. Because this is kind of, after all, it's a multi-sensor infrastructure. So kind of one of the interesting things is when you're able to put a lot of these measurements together, and I'll get back to that in a bit. But the cameras have been operational for quite some time, and it's also one of the where we had researchers with specific interests that had been working on this data for quite some time. So on the left, you see an image from node 4. On node 4, we've moved off the shelf and into a soft sand mud bottom. On node 1, that's kind of located in the middle of this coral, cold water coral field. This has been studied quite a bit now, and it's been a lot of work to develop methods to automatically analyze these images. So this is an example of one of those papers published last year by Austral. And the neat thing here is that they've used image analysis processing to take a look at the activity of individual polyps. So they're actually measuring and quantifying coral activity, and then linking that into environmental parameters such as temperature. Moving over to the echo sounders, we're using Kongsberg broadband echo sounders on all of our nodes now. And this is one example. So this is an echogram. So basically, I guess most of you are familiar with spectrogram. So it's basically the same thing, other than its range on the y-axis, and the colors indicate the strength of the reflection from organisms in the water column. So on top of this image, you see backscatter, strong backscatter from the surface and periods where you have bad weather. So it's layers of bubbles beneath the surface. And this is 1 year of data from node 1. And there are two things I want to point out here. One is that we're now able to kind of quantify the ecosystem at different time scales. So this is a year. We're also now multi-years, and we can go into zoom in and analyze days to minutes to seconds. And this also shows, so the lower figure here shows early autumn when we start to see dial vertical migration again. But if you zoom in on these three images or parts of the data set, then that's three of the really important parts of this data set and what we're looking for. So A indicates schools of herring migrating southwards towards the spawning grounds. And B is, as you can see here, that's kind of individual cod, again, migrating to spawn. So we can, in most cases, especially now with broadband, we can actually count how many cod are passing this observatory throughout this migration. And the last one, C, that shows on the surface, you see this dense light blue layer, and that is spring spawning has started, or well, we're actually midsummer now, but this is the layer of phytoplankton and zooplankton. And now we're able to quantify the timing of these processes and also look into multi-years and see if the timing of any of this change. For instance, the timing of spring bloom is critical for the survival of fish larvae, and it's also critical and the survival of fish larvae is critical for seabirds. So we're able to monitor if there are any changes in the system and link any potential changes to the environment. And now moving over to the passive part. So as mentioned, we've used Ocean Sonics now since 2013 on node 1. And we have, well, speaking for myself at least, our group, which has kind of is behind this or initiated this observatory, we're mainly active acoustics group. So the observatory is to a large extent built around active acoustics, but we also work quite a bit with noise and potential effects on marine life. But still, kind of using hydrophones for this purpose, for monitoring, is a bit new. So we have a lot to learn here. But the Ocean Sonics hydrophone has worked really well. And this is kind of a similar image to what I showed earlier. In the middle, there's a spectrogram showing the first year of data. And again, on the above that spectrogram and below, there are some kind of samples of what we're observing. And of course, one of the obvious things there is the fin whale layer, which is indicated, which you see and indicated by this black box. But this is really, really fascinating and really useful. This kind of opens up entirely a new world for us in terms of monitoring migration and occurrence of marine mammals in this area. So it has provided a really, really interesting data set. Just showing two examples of some of the work that's been done on this data set. The most recent paper was on looking into underwater noise radiated by ships. So Grisong here has found something like 50-60 passings of 26 ships directly above the observatory, and it's then been able to, for all the individual ships, measure sound pressure level of these vessels as they pass both north to south and south to north, which is a really unique data set. And that paper is out in Marine Pollution Bulletin, so and was published a couple of months ago. Another work that's been done is kind of the opposite. So using removing all the data, or removing times where you had vessel traffic, and just looked at the ambient noise from wind. And one of the reasons is that this is also, the LoVe Ocean is used as a reference station for a European project looking into noise, anthropogenic noise in the North Sea. But one of the interesting things that he's found, and this is presented at UACE 2019, it's also available online. But one of the striking things is how much higher wind generated noise at low frequencies is compared to the Vance curve in this area. And yes, like I mentioned, marine mammals, it's area with a lot of marine mammals, and very interesting. And this is a data set we only kind of started scratching the surface on. But this certainly will bring us a lot of new knowledge when it comes to occurrence of mammals and also their place in the ecosystem. These are actually videos, so I think I'll have to skip. Just to point out one of the kind of small projects that started, and that's a master program or a master project. Saskia Martin, she just started in a couple of months ago. And what she will do with the data set is to take initially 1 year, look into, find and extract humpback whale vocalization, which is quite, well, from October, November until February, March, we have a lot of humpbacks in the area. And you also have a fair amount of humpback whale song. So she is extracting those data and analyzing them. And there's also in discussions to see if we can kind of compare this with other observations or other characterizations of humpback whale song in the Atlantic. And one other striking thing here is how kind of the song dies or the song stops when the vessel noise is picking up, and this is something we see quite a lot of. So one of the interesting things, like I mentioned, is kind of when you can start to piece together information from the different sensors. So I have a couple of examples. The first one is hydrophone and echo sounder. This is just a small piece of work I did a couple of years ago. But again, this is the echo sounder data, so you have the surface at the top. And if you look at approximately 50 meters range, then there's a layer, light blue layer of a lot of small organisms. And what we see is by sampling is that this is a mesopelagic layer consisting of small fish and other organisms, usually found in a mesopelagic layer. And these events happen during winter a couple of times. And what you see if you look at the ADSP data is that often seems to link into an overflow of Atlantic water onto the shelf. And because we know that there are, if you go with a vessel off shelf, there is a mesopelagic layer there. So it kind of makes sense that there following the water onto the shelf. And every time you see this mesopelagic layer in this area, if you then go into the hydrophone data, you will find sperm whales during winter. So this upper spectrogram is clicks and creaks from sperm whales. The lower one is a zoom from the previous echogram, where you actually have the sperm whale inside the echo sounder beam. So piecing this together, you can start to see, okay, the behavior of the sperm whales as indicated by the hydrophone, and then looking to the echo sounder data to see how that layer reacts to this these whales clicking, creaking, and moving towards these layers to forage. So in this case, we take each individual inside the layer that we're able to resolve and then target track them. So that in this case, we see a predominantly vertical avoidance reaction from this layer. So just a small example of kind of what interesting things you can start to dig into if you have this range of sensors available. So now we've just gotten some of the other hydrophones online, and we haven't really been able to dig into the data yet, and we're still kind of in the startup phase. So, but what I can show in this case is that, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of sperm whales during summer just north of the observatory. And one of the kind of striking features of the ISO-LISTEN data from node 1 is that we never see sperm whales during summer. So it was very interesting when we started to get these shelf break nodes up and running. This is an example from node 3 this summer, and there you see a lot of sperm whales throughout the summer, which kind of indicates that they're following the shelf break instead of the shelf when they're migrating. And this also makes sense when you compare it to some tagging experiments that was done this year, which shows the same thing. But they also linger, so they might use this canyon also for feeding during summer. So I'll round off here by just mentioning that. So the observatory is will be a part of a larger, let's say, infrastructure. We're now working also on a project proposal to integrate more tightly all the coastal observing systems and initiatives we have in Norway. So hopefully by next year we'll be able to start that work, and the LoVe will be an important part of that. So this will kind of be a Norwegian OOI, if you will. And again, this focusing on the Lofoten Vesterålen area because of the importance of this area. But we also focus on the western coast of Norway and possibly some other sites, but start to do a more integrated coastal monitoring. So we are in the kind of final stages of getting things in place. So if all goes according to plan, the final installations of nodes and sensors will happen in November this year. We'll still need to deploy the last mooring, the mooring for node 4 next year. And hope, well, if all goes according to plan, by next winter, by early spring, we'll have the data flow from all the nodes online and available. And we're very interested in, if anyone found anything of this interesting, we're more than happy to discuss with you. And we're ranging from operations to maintenance to how to manage data. We're also very interested in new technologies and new methods that we can employ in LoVe. either for testing or to improve our observing capabilities. And personally, of course, the passive acoustic monitoring capabilities is something I'm very interested in increasing. And finally, anyone interested in the data using InfoScience for student projects, please feel free to contact us. There is a lot of people who's been working with this. Kind of the initial work with this started more than 10 years ago. So there is no room to mention everyone, but a lot of these people have been instrumental in getting this up and running, and of course the funding from both Equinor and the Research Council. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and again, please feel free to contact us if anything is of this interesting, anything you want to discuss. And I also posted the website address at the bottom of the page there. It's very easy to remember. It's loveocean.no. Okay, so thank you.
Well, let me start off by saying congratulations on 120 years. I didn't realize. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here when you could be.
No, there is no party. Well, actually, the party is in Tromsø today, so that I couldn't go anyway.
So that was a fantastic overview of this very special Northern Ocean Observatory. And I know I have a few questions, so I jotted down a few while you were speaking. And if anybody watching has some questions for Geir, please feel free to leave it on our social media feeds. I am monitoring them right now, so if you do have a question, we will do our best to answer them live. If you think of something later, the email addresses for Geir and his partners were up on the screen, and I will drop them in the show notes below. So if you think of something later that you'd like to ask or just want to reach out, feel free to contact them. So the first question I have is always, what are you hearing most in your hydrophone data?
We're hearing, well, this is Norway, Northern Norway, so we're hearing a lot of weather. There's a lot of weather. There's, of course, also a lot of marine traffic in this area, like you might have seen on one of the slides. Other than that, fin whales, a lot of fin whales, humpback whales and sperm whales during winter. Of course, pilot whales, killer whales, dolphins, minke whales. So I think we get a fair share of everything, or of everything that's in this area. Sorry? Yes.
Sounds like a pretty diverse community of marine mammals in the region. So you mentioned you got your first hydrophone in 2013. Since you first deployed it, have you had to change or reconfigure based on, for instance, the environment, or was there a point when you had to move your hydrophone to collect better data?
Well, we have reconfigured it a couple of times, mostly just simply the sampling frequency. We started out with 512, and we got some complaints of, that just gathered too much data for storage and things like that. So, but not really. We've moved. One thing we've done is we had to reconfigure the satellite. But that's more the platform than you guys, because we found out that the current was so high in this area, which meant that this platform started to vibrate when you had something like 1 meter per second and above current speed. So it's kind of, that made a lot of noise. So I think the most important reconfiguration is the platform. The hydrophone has not really done too much reconfiguration to know.
So you mentioned the amount of data. I mean, hydrophones produce a huge amount of data, but so does everything else within an ocean observatory. How do you manage all the data that you collect, not only from the hydrophone, but from all of your sensors?
Yeah. So in the beginning, the hydrophone was clearly the one that produces produce the highest data volume. But now that we switched to broadband echo sounders, that's collects more data. The volume is even larger with those sensors, at least the way we're operating them. But we have a national infrastructure, Norwegian Marine Data Center at IMR, and they are good at, and they have the capability to store large amounts of data. I think and they're also kind of in the process of scaling up to meet the demands from the observatory, as well as kind of all our vessels and other platforms. But I think where we have to focus now and figure out something clever is to how to make this available to you in a sensible way, or anyone who wants to work with it. It's easy for the time series data, it's the echo sounder data and how to find data. We're kind of working on to figure out the solution. But data storage is fine. We have the capability or capacity for that.
So you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that you faced a lot of challenges when you were first installing the various nodes. Can you describe what was your greatest challenge with actually creating this Ocean Observatory?
Yes, I think it's there are several, I would say, I'm not sure how to put it, but when it comes to the nodes, for instance, it's been very much we have been the first ones to deploy these, so they have been developed kind of for the observatory, and of course, with all new technology, once you deploy it, unexpected things might happen, especially with new technology. So we run into some of that, and also some sensors are tricky to get working properly on observatory like this, or in general, like some of the chemical sensors are, challenging, and it's kind of a new technology still.
And especially getting everything to work together, I can only imagine.
Yes. But especially when there is so much new technology that we're using here, it will, no matter how much you test, something will happen, and then so it's an iterative process to get this up and running completely.
And you showed some examples of how the hydrophone data works with the echo sounder, but are there some other types of data that work particularly well together?
So the echo sounder, so that example is also kind of included the ASP, the current profiler. So that is also an interesting thing, especially compared with the echo sounders. And we have one project now that will look into breaking internal waves and how that influences kind of up and down welling. And in that case, echo sounders, ASPs, as well as the moorings with temperature, salinity sensors. So one example. And of course, there might be a lot of things we haven't thought about, and we'll discover as we go.
So have you noticed any change over the lifetime of your acoustic deployments, in particular with the decrease in vessel traffic throughout the course of the pandemic?
It's a very interesting question, and we just started to look into that. When it comes to the pandemic, one unfortunate thing is that was kind of in the middle of our deployment and refurbishing of the old one. So we don't have data from the ISO Node 1 for the period of when the pandemic started. It was redeployed this summer or spring. We have one of the new nodes, but we had some, takes a bit of time to adjust things, like you mentioned. So unfortunately, we don't really have a great data set on that. But we're looking into it to see if there's something we can pull out of that. But yeah, it will be a bit challenging to look into that, I think.
So you mentioned the discovery of sperm whales when you couldn't see them, but you could hear them. Is there anything else that you've heard in your hydrophone data that surprised you?
Well, to be honest, I hadn't really worked with hydrophones before for this project much. We did some noise measurements and things like that, but so everything surprised me. I mean, it was just when you started to get this data, it was mind blowing, interesting, and so yeah, everything. But besides that, yeah, especially the humpback whale song that we have each winter it's really surprised me.
And they are spectacular singers, so it's always
Yeah.
nice to hear them.
Hmm.
So you did mention that you're looking at installing some autonomous robots. So beyond just the autonomous vehicles and robotics in the future, is there something that you would like to see with your acoustic and the larger Ocean Observatory program? And this can be pie in the sky. You know, what would be your dream if you could add anything to it?
I would really like to. This is I mean, not large scale thing, but I'd like to add some compact acoustic arrays to the observatory, passive acoustic, and yes, when it comes to the echo sounders, we're very nice to implement AUVs or something similar with imaging systems that could go into the plankton layers and image them and give us some information about what's the composition of these layers that we're observing with the echo sounders. Well, and there's a long list, but that was the two first that sprung to mind.
Well, fantastic. Hopefully, we can help you achieve that.
Hope so.
Those are all the questions that I have for now. And I'm going to let you head off to hopefully the back end of the celebration happening for your 120 years. So thank you so much, Geir, for joining us today. And if there's a question that you didn't get to ask, please send Ocean Sonics a message. Or Geir also shared his contact details so you can connect with him personally. You can always drop us a line on our social media channels. And you can also find the LoVe Ocean Observatory online at loveocean.no. And this will also provide access, and correct me if I'm wrong, to the online data portal. So
yes, it will.
Yeah,
but I'll just mention it's kind of that's work in progress. But it also has links to the old data portal for Node 1, which is still operational and where you can get all the Node 1 data.
I did check out some of the historic data, and trust, even though it's old, it's still new to me, and it's interesting. So if anybody wants to check it out, please visit loveocean.no. And I will drop links in the show notes down below if you're watching on YouTube, and I'll drop it in the comments if you're watching on Facebook. So if you want to revisit this presentation, it's going to be available on our YouTube channel as well as on our Facebook page. And I will share the link through our other social media channels. We'll be continuing next week with our Ray October event, and we're going to be joined by Manuel Morgan of Ocean Networks Canada. We're bringing it back to the Canadian Ocean Observatory next week. So please join us next Thursday at 2 p.m. ADT for another in-depth session on acoustic arrays. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.